Hello, and welcome back for another week of Read It First by Lisa Gray, a podcast dedicated to discussing a new book each week. This week, the discussion is over What Comes After by Joanne Tompkins. This is the author's debut novel. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so that you never miss the next discussion. A few things before I start. First, sorry about posting late. I've had no voice from an upper respiratory infection, and as you can hear, my voice still isn't quite there. Second, this book does fall around a murder-suicide, so the discussion may hit hard for some. For that, I am sorry. Just remember, the suicide prevention hotline is 988. Call or text them at any time. Third, I'm diving straight into the spoilers, so readers beware. And lastly, forgive me as I will be bouncing around a bit, but the book sort of does this as well. So the main characters of the book are Isaac, Evangeline, and Lori, with the deceased Jonah being one of the main talkers and Daniel being present, but we don't really get anything from his point of view. And then, of course, we cannot forget Rufus, which is Isaac's dog. So just a little background. Jonah is one of Lori's two children. The other is Nell's. And Daniel was Isaac's son. The main theme of this book is one of forgiveness. As we all know, forgiveness isn't easy, and it always comes at a hefty price. Forgiving isn't forgiving, but it's accepting the pain. It's accepting all that comes with it and accepting the person for what they did. Or just accepting what happened and knowing that there's nothing you can do to change it. So Evangeline has to work to forgive her mother. Isaac has to work to forgive Lori. Lori has to work on forgiving herself and kind of Jonah as well. Ironically, it's a baby that is neither Daniel's or Jonah's that brings everyone together. So rolling back to kind of the main basis, it primarily revolves around the fact that Jonah kills Daniel. The two boys were neighbors and raised together. Jonah often stayed over at Daniel's and even attended Quaker meetings with Isaac until Daniel decided it wasn't cool. They'd attended them together. But the neat thing is, Jonah actually took back up going to the meetings with Isaac until he had a Quaker moment, which is whenever you're basically talking to God just silently, meditating, and you just quake, hence the term Quaker. But he felt that he had no right to this since he wasn't a Quaker, so he stopped going. Jonah has an introspection in the Day I Died chapters of the book that he wishes he had continued going to the meetings, that everything may not have happened as it did if he had. Jonah's kind of speaking from the grave from some of it. Some of it is kind of speaking from the point of, I'm going to kill myself. Because at one point he mentions Evangeline being 8 or 9 months pregnant, and he feels that it's his daughter. Well, as we know, he's dead before she even really knows that she's pregnant. So Jonah discusses why everything happens. He discusses why he killed Daniel. And he talks about the fact that he didn't know he was going to kill Daniel until it happened. And honestly, if Daniel hadn't been bragging about having sex with Evangeline, or Red, as the boys knew her, it probably wouldn't have happened. And Daniel was one of those jocks that just kind of felt like the world owed him everything. He was very self-centered, which is ironic considering he was raised with Quakers. And come to find out from Evangeline's perspective, Daniel actually ended up forcing Evangeline to have sex with him. She kept saying no, but he just kept pushing. And she felt that sex was the payment to spend time with him and for him buying her pizza. Jonah was shy. He was kind of the outcast. He didn't really fit in. And he never had anything that was really his. His family didn't have the most money. His dad was a little insane and abusive. So he never had anyone that would choose him over Daniel. But Evangeline preferred Jonah over Daniel. She even willingly had sex with Jonah because she preferred him that much. And at that point that she had sex with both the boys, she did not know she was pregnant. Yes, she actually got pregnant before she met the boys, little to her knowledge. She discusses it further on, and so will I. Going back to Evangeline's past, her mother was neglectful. She was addicted to heroin, so much so to the point that her mother ended up going into rehab and she got put into the system. When her mom came out, she was addicted to Jesus and took Evangeline back. Her mother put her various boyfriends kind of above Evangeline. She left Evangeline with the questionable guys who would just basically sit around doing nothing, including a 40-ish-year-old who convinced her to have sex with him. She comments about the fact that she didn't really think he was that hot, but then he just looked at her a certain way. So her mother came home to Evangeline having sex with the boyfriend. She pulls Evangeline off by her hair, yelling at her that she's a slut. And Evangeline comments that she remembers getting kicked and just curling up into a ball. And at some point, the police were called and she remembers getting a blanket tossed over her. The mom kicked the boyfriend out, and Evangeline was sad about this, but she was also glad that it wasn't her. They then moved off the coast of Washington, which is where Isaac lives. And so when they first moved there, her mother decided that she was not going to go to school because it's filled with sin. So she was going to homeschool her. However, her mother's idea of homeschooling was the Bible and basic math. But within a few weeks, her mother got a job and the homeschooling stopped. So Evangeline just got to watch cable, which her mom had previously said was the devil's sin or something as akin to that. But a few weeks later, Evangeline finds her mother had left her $200 and her grandmother's brooch. Her mom left her in a trailer rental that they had had for, I think, 6 months total by the time that Evangeline gets there now. Well, Evangeline threw away the brooch. She was understandably angry. She was probably only 16, maybe 17. Probably didn't think too much about trying to sell it and making money. And as we know, $200 only goes so far. So she talks about stealing things and becoming really good about breaking into people's houses, taking drugs, taking cash, but she had a rule of only taking like 10 or 20%. She would also steal from grocery stores and stuff because you gotta eat. Well, she had heard about this place in a different town where younger women could go and have sex with men and get paid for it. So she goes over there and she sees the principal, which at that point it wasn't her principal. She wasn't enrolled in the school. But it turns out that that's one of Isaac's best friends. Peter, I believe his name was. But Peter asks how old she was, and she said, "How old do you want me to be?" And he thought about it a moment and passed. He went on to the next girl, who evidently gave him the correct answer of at least 18, even though she probably wasn't. But another older man pulls up and offers Evangeline $20. He says, "If we go without a condom, I'll give you another 20 for a total of 40. Well, $40 is a lot when you have nothing, so she went ahead and went, I don't think I'm anywhere near that time of the month that I could get pregnant, so yeah, let's do it. So she continues to live in the abandoned trailer that her mom left her in. It's a rental, and she finally leaves when it comes to the point where the sheriff has placed an eviction notice and states that he'll be there the following morning. During this time, Evangeline becomes sick in the morning, so having morning sickness, And she comments about having tender breast, and she just says, well, I could have stolen a pregnancy test, but let's face it, my body's telling me what I need to know, and if anyone didn't know these symptoms, that's on them. So the evening before the sheriff is to come enforce the eviction, Evangeline wanders off to Isaac's property, thinking there's a possibility that Daniel's the father. Again, at this point, she doesn't know when she got pregnant. She just knows that she is. But she doesn't go to the front door. She doesn't feel that she deserves that, and she ends up curling up under a tree on the property using a jacket, I believe, as a blanket. It's cold. It's the Pacific Northwest after all. Rufus, Isaac's dog, goes crazy. Apparently he smelled her, and he insisted on Isaac letting him out. So Isaac lets him out. 20-ish minutes later, Isaac keeps calling for Rufus, and he doesn't come back. So he puts on his shoes and goes out and finds Rufus snuffling Evangeline, and he invites her to get cleaned up, have some food, and have a warm place to rest her head. Well, she's understandably weary, because what has she ever gotten out of adults except for getting yelled at and not being treated well? So let's talk a little bit about Isaac. Isaac's a divorcee. His wife left him because, on hindsight on his part, he never had much feeling. His ex-wife Catherine had came to help search for Daniel's body, but she left after a couple services. She couldn't handle it, which is understandable. She left Isaac to live in the large Victorian mansion that they had bought together well before Daniel's birth. When Rufus brings Isaac to Evangeline, Isaac feels that God has put Evangeline into his life for a reason. He feels that it is his godly duty to help others, essentially to pay it forward. He never complains when Evangeline yells at him, or even whenever she steals money from him. And they don't ever state exactly how much she steals, but at one point she took $200 out of an oven mitt that he told her that she could use for worst case scenarios. I don't think running away from him was his consideration of worst case. However, Isaac doesn't hold it against her. He kind of understands what she's going through. Also, I don't think Isaac wants to live alone. I think he misses having Daniel and Catherine. I mean, he'd started living in something akin to communes after he left home. He was working and living with other Quakers, and then he met Catherine, who was thinking about becoming a Quaker herself. They, of course, fell in love, and after they were married, she convinced him to leave the East Coast, which I believe it was the Pennsylvania area, and move off the coast of Washington State. They eventually had Daniel, and when Catherine was in her early 30s, she found out she had infertility due to fibroids. About that time, a pregnant Lori moves in with her husband and Jonah. Jonah and Daniel is about the same age. They become friends while the parents keep some distance. Infertility utterly sucks. Lori was at least blessed with one child, but knowing that her and Isaac had wanted a huge family and not being able to have another child is painful. Then Isaac not showing much feeling had to hurt all the more. When you're going through hell, you kind of want your partner there with you. Even if it doesn't make much of a difference in their eyes, knowing that they're hurting too helps, because you know that you're both going through the pain together. And watching a neighbor go through a successful pregnancy had to have been hard. Catherine does hold out, and she doesn't leave until 10 months before Daniel's murdered. I think Daniel's about 16 or 17 whenever he's murdered. I honestly can't blame Catherine. I feel that it would be very painful to live in a house that you had envisioned with your husband filling up with kids, and a husband that you thought was a lot more in touch with his emotions, and he wasn't. She left the town that reminded her of everything, of her failure as a woman. And yeah, it does feel that way. Catherine isn't a big part of the story, but she's lost a lot. And she definitely probably holds anger towards herself, and she definitely is upset that she wasn't there for the last 10 months of her son's life. As parents, Lori and Isaac continually wonder what they did wrong with raising their boys. You kind of get that from both viewpoints. But I suppose it kind of goes back to nature versus nurture. Because let's face it, how you are raised and the environment you are raised in all plays a part in who you become. Psychologists have done many studies on this, and it's still up for discussion. Because everything we encounter from conception to death really makes us all different. Some of those studies are actually really interesting if you're ever curious. Later at the end of the book, Evangeline expresses her concern, at least in the book, to the readers, what type of mom she'll be to Emma, her little girl, and she hopes that she's a better mother than her own mother was. She's fairly certain that she'll have Lori and Isaac with her to help raise this child, and to help make sure that this child has a good, loving home. But in order to do that, they must learn to forgive themselves and each other. Isaac understandably holds a lot of anger against Lori, as it is her son that killed Daniel. And as we learn throughout the book, she also burned Jonah's clothes that contained the blood of Daniel and a deer that Jonah had killed right before. She even admits to Isaac that she knew with the amount of blood that was on Jonah's clothes, if that was Daniel's, that Daniel was dead. There was nothing she could do to help him. In Jonah's suicide note that he's writing during his last day, he gives the exact location of where to find Daniel's body, and he states that he's sorry. It doesn't explain why. The fact is that he was scared that he was becoming his father. He knew that at one point his father was at the point where he was willing to kill the entire family before his dad turned the gun on himself and shot himself in the head. Jonah decided to go out the same way. Death by gun is quite common for men. It's one of the top 3 in conjunction with hanging and carbon monoxide poisoning. All these ways can go wrong, and unfortunately I've seen and heard cases of all 3 failing and causing paralysis or permanent disfigurement. That being said, if you or someone you know have suicidal thoughts, don't hesitate to reach out and get help. You have friends, and if you don't feel comfortable, know that your physician or the suicide hotline is not going to judge you. You're not weak in asking for help. In fact, it's very strong. And the great part is, if you can't vocalize your concerns because it hurts too much to say them out loud, you can text them now. You can even go on the internet and talk to someone about it virtually. The suicide hotline is as simple as calling or text 988. They are there for you 24 hours a day because people care. You matter. But in this case, Jonah felt that suicide was just. He admitted to killing Daniel and felt that it was only right that he died too. Jonah felt that he had a monster rise up in him. That was what he saw in his father. I think if he had gotten psychological help, his mom definitely would have supported him, especially with the fact that his father was abusive and came dang close to killing the family before he killed himself. His mom would have done anything for him, undoubtedly, as most mothers would. After Jonah murdered Daniel, killed himself, Lori has to learn to forgive her son, because he took his own life. And as a parent, that has to be unthinkable. That's your baby. I can't imagine how difficult that is. Forgiving him for killing Daniel was negligible to Lori. I mean, it's her baby. Ted Bundy's own mother never saw him as a killer, and she always felt that he was innocent. Lori even helped cover up Jonah's killing Daniel by burning the bloody boots and clothes that Jonah had wore when he killed Daniel. But Lori also has to work on forgiving Jonah for killing himself, for taking her only son away from her too early. Evangeline, I think, definitely helps Lori heal. She helps her see and remember the sweet boy she raised. I mean, if Evangeline could fall in love with Jonah right away and have this beautiful baby girl, Emma, then Jonah couldn't have been all bad, right? Anyways, I know this is a short discussion, but as you hear, my voice is going in and out. Take a read on the book. Yes, it will hit hard in some points. But it's a good book, especially for an author's debut. Anyways, next week we will be discussing Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. It was published in January of 1932. Aldous Huxley's profoundly important classic of world literature, Brave New World, is a searching vision of unequal technologically advanced future where humans are genetically bred, social indoctrined, and pharmaceutically anesthetized to passively uphold an authoritarian ruling order, all at the cost of our freedom, full humanity, and perhaps our souls. It's a genius who spent his life decrying the onward march of the machine. Huxley was a man of incomparable talents, equally an artist, a spiritual seeker, and one of history's keenest observers of the human nature and civilization. Brave New World, his masterpiece, has enthralled and terrified millions of readers and retains its urgent relevance to this day as both a warning to be heeded as we head into tomorrow and as thought-provoking, satisfying work of literature. Written in the shadow of the rise of fascism during the 1930s, Brave New World likewise speaks to a 21st century world dominated by mass entertainment, technology, medicine, and pharmaceuticals, the arts of persuasion, and the hidden influence of elitists. Remember to subscribe to the Free to First channel so you never miss out on a new discussion. Thanks, guys.